Hey everyone, welcome back. You're watching Impossible Color, and today I'm going to work on a corporate portrait makeover. It's been a little while since I did a polished video. For the last week or so I've been trying out doing a YouTube live. If you haven't checked out one of those sessions already, I recommend dropping in because you can ask questions directly as I'm working on my edits. So in the exposure area, I am going to bring down my highlights a little bit. Got a little bit of sky there that's just overexposed. If I turn on my indicators, you can see that. And the shadows, we're losing a lot of detail in the dark areas here. So pump those up quite a bit. And we're also going to make those whites pop. Somewhere around there. But because we brought up the shadows, we're losing a little bit of kind of our extreme blacks. So I want to just notch that down a little bit as well. I'm going to turn off that white indicator and see if that affects the overall look of the image much. And you know, sometimes when it goes completely white, it doesn't actually look too bad. It really depends on where it's at in your image. I'm going to add a little bit of clarity so that local contrast is improved. Now for this particular image, I actually had her stand on top of a bench, and this added a lot of length to her legs. I got down nice and low and shot upwards. Now in the HSL tab, we'll start with the hue. And I'm going to bring all those reds down. The oranges are fine. I usually leave oranges alone because it affects the skin quite a bit, and it can really cause a lot of problems if you do any changes in there. If there are oranges in the image that you want to work with that don't involve the skin, I recommend you isolating those separately. Maybe using a mask. And magentas look good to me. I think overall the saturation is pretty pleasing. I think I might just pump up the purple a little bit. And now for the luminance. By increasing the luminance of your orange and yellow, you can get a lot of pop in the skin. Help separate it from the clothing in the background if your clothing is darker. And I'm actually going to bring down the greens so this bush doesn't stand out quite so much. And I want a little bit more definition in the building, so I'm going to bring down the aqua and the blue. I get a little bit more detail in the shirt by making the luminance higher on the purple. Now we're going to do some lens corrections. If you go to the middle tab, it says color. And this will correct some of the issues we have with some chromatic aberration. You can see the green and magenta outlines that are happening around the edges. See if I slide that on and off, you can see all that purple magenta and purple outline disappears. And you want to tweak the range so that it's removing it where you don't want it, but it's not going in and affecting areas where you don't want it to change. So let's say, for example, you had magenta around the lips, or perhaps the makeup around the eyes, or somewhere else, maybe a piece of clothing that your model is wearing. If you turn that slider around, you want to make sure that you're not kind of graying out other areas that might be important with those colors. So I think that's pretty good for Adobe Camera Raw. Just gonna try out the lens profile corrections. I think that gives us a little bit more length in the body, so I'm gonna run with that, and it also fixes up some of a subtle vignette that was happening around the edges. Alright, so now in Photoshop, the first thing that I want to do is some skin corrections. So we want to remove just minor little imperfections in the skin, little bruising or blemishes, and little things like that should be really easy to fix up. So we're going to do some frequency separation. So if you take your background and you duplicate it twice, if you just drag to the new layer icon, it will make a duplicate of that. I'm going to call the first one low frequency, and the top one high frequency. I'm going to turn off the top one, and I'm just going to do a little bit of blurring on this with the Gaussian blur. I usually do something around between 6 and 8, depending on how distant the subject is. But basically what I'm going for is that I still want the major features to be recognizable, but I want the tones of skin to be nice and smooth. Then on the high frequency, I'm going to select that, and we're going to go to Image and Apply Image. And we're going to select low frequency, so that's the layer that's below the one that we're working on. And the blending mode we're going to set to subtract. So basically what this layer is going to do is it's going to find that difference between the blurry smooth one and the normal layer that we have. So all that's going to be left are those really fine details. And if it's not already set your scale to 2 and your offset to 128. Then you can go and in your layer blending mode, set it to linear light. I'm going to put both of these into a folder and a new group from layer and call it skin. If I turn this on and off, you won't notice any change. We didn't do anything yet. Just these two layers now represent what the image looks like, but separated into a low frequency and a high frequency. Now let's turn off the top one. On the low frequency, we're going to do some extra blurring. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select little patches of light skin and go Gaussian blur. And you can set it to whatever value you need to blur it without causing a lot of distortion. You don't want, for example, the eyebrow to blur into the eye or the teeth to blur into the lips. So I'm going to go with a value of 8. Select little chunks. Control F will apply the same thing over again. If you notice any major shifts in color in the skin, you could also use the paintbrush and have it set to color. One thing that helps really nice portraits stand out from an average portrait is the having a consistent skin tones. If you're working with a mouse and this is a little bit cumbersome for you, you might want to do a whole bunch of selections at once and run the filter at one time. I'm going to undo that because it looks like I'm blurring some of the shoe into the foot. just not what I want. And just to notice, I have a feather on my selection here of 5 pixels. That was probably just left there from the last time that I used it. So if you don't have that, I would recommend putting a little bit of feather on your selection. Okay, now we'll turn the low frequency off and we'll turn the high frequency on. Now this is really going to exaggerate the skin. Nobody would ever look like this, but it just gives us a great guide for editing. If any veins are showing a little stronger than you'd like, you can just use the spot healing brush to remove those. Or if you prefer, you could use any of the tools in here. If you want to use the patch tool or the healing brush tool, where you hold down Alt to select an area that you want to sample from. Or you could use the clone stamp tool as well. I'm going to try using the patch tool to deal with that. Usually the spot removal tool works really well, but once in a while it'll kind of get into this sampling problem where it doesn't know where to grab from. Got a stray hair there. And now I'm going to turn on the low frequency again. Let's see how these are working together. Let's turn this skin on and off. I think for the legs, we're going to see the most improvement. It's looking much better already. Now for the skin on the face, we've got a little bit of color variation that's happening around the eyes here. So I'm actually going to make a new layer and set it to color. And set my brush to something soft. And I'm going to sample the skin nearby. Just adding a little bit more definition in this color on the edges of the mouth, so the lipstick can continue right to the edge. Slight bit of makeup touch-up. I'm going to merge the entire skin folder together when I think that I got it pretty close to what I'm looking for. And then I'll do some final touch-ups once those are merged. You'll notice that some spots will get stubborn and you can't seem to remove them on the high layer or the low layer, but when they're merged you can correct them pretty easily. So there was no pre-sharpening done in Adobe Camera Raw, so I'll be doing all the sharpening in this program. So anyone out there that shoots in JPEG, there's actually some sharpening that's taking place before you even see the image and start editing it. So things are going to naturally look a little less sharp when you're working in Camera Raw. Now I noticed that we've got a little bit of issue with the nail polish not reading properly, so I'm going to make a new layer and set that to color. And I'm just going to correct all of the nail polish. Coloring the edges of this thing, so we're just going to get rid of that fringing by simply selecting color nearby and painting. And because we're on the color blending mode, it's going to keep the details of the layer underneath, and it's just going to apply the color to it. Sometimes you notice it the most when it's on a shiny object along the edges, like this watch here. Okay, that looks good for the skin corrections. So just going to merge that all together. And now we're going to do some color corrections. So now I'm going to make an adjustment layer. And I'm going to start by selecting color balance. And on the shadows. And now for the midtones. And the highlights. Always do a before and after to make sure your changes are having some effect. It's subtle, but I like the extra depth that it's given me. So I'm going to keep that. And I'm going to make another adjustment layer, this time Selective Color. Now I'm going to make a new group from layers and call this color. Gonna zoom in, make sure that everything looks good. Some subtle changes there, but I think they do add value. Now, I had a bit of an issue with these flowers down here. I find that they're just drawing a bit too much attention from the portrait. I think for this one, I'm going to go to hue and saturation. And we're going to isolate these flowers and tone them down quite a bit. So I'm going to go to magentas. And I'm going to take down the saturation. But I am going to increase the range to make sure that we've got all of them covered down there. Okay, now that I've got a rough idea of what I want down there, I'm going to go to the box to the right of the layer. And now that's a layer mask that's created automatically whenever you create an adjustment layer. And I'm actually going to go Shift F5, which brings up the fill menu. And I'm going to fill it in black. So basically my mask is blocking it all out. But now I'm going to paint white in where I want it to show. Now that we have our mask created, we can tweak this a little bit more. So I think that much more neutral tone provides more balance to the image, and the eyes aren't immediately drawn down to her feet instead of her face. You can see the before and after there. Certainly a more vibrant shot and more interesting, but seeing that this is more of a corporate shoot, I don't think the bright colors are appropriate for this. So I've got a little bit of an issue with the skin. Legs look good and the upper body and face look good, but there's some inconsistency in the coloring, and this is often the case depending on what kind of objects are nearby and they're reflecting off. So someone's upper body may not necessarily match the lower body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a sample of this color of the upper body. I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to paint it in. And now I'm going to set that layer to overlay. And now you can see it matches the upper body a lot more closely. Now we're going to group everything that we see together and merge those. I'm going to go to Filter Nick Collection, and we're going to use the output sharpener that's included in there. You can download this for free. Google recently released it, and it's got a lot of great tools in there. Click OK to that. And before and after on the sharpen. So we can see the before and after. And that's it for the corporate portrait makeover. Thanks for checking out Impossible Color. If you learned something useful here and you'd like to share it with someone else, I'd appreciate it if you sent them a link to the video. And if you want to support the channel, please click the subscribe button. You can thumbs up and you can add some comments below if you have any tips or tricks that you think would be useful for the community. Thanks for watching and see you next week.